a bit of a change of pace, and that's the way we like to roll here with the Game Changers program. We obviously confront the serious issues in life, but also we like to look at those stories of inspiration. And our next speaker is surely that, SHARELLE McMAHon. She will talk to us on elite performance and performing under pressure. She's one of Australia's all-time greats. She achieved just about every accolade on offer in netball, not only in Australia but around the world. From country Victoria, Rochester, SHARELLE represented Australia 118 times, 12 of those as captain. She was a star shooter, was part of 3 Netball World Cups in 1999, 2003 and 2007, and 4 Commonwealth Games in 1998, 2002, 2006 and 2010. She did suffer an Achilles injury, denying her the opportunity of leading her country to the 2011 World Titles in Singapore. SHARELLE scored the match-winning goal to deliver Australia the 1999 World Title, which I'm sure many of us can remember, which was a memorable final against the country who we love to despise, being New Zealand, in netball in particular, in cricket. And that was held in Christchurch, for those who can't remember. She finished with 2,520 international goals at an average of just over 21 per test. After taking a year away from sport in 2012 for the birth of her first child, SHARELLE returned to the court in the ANZ Championship with the Melbourne Vixens, who she led to the 2009 title before formally retiring from the game at the end of 2013, and is now a media star. So let's just relive one of those moments, which is a moment that I just mentioned before that we can probably all remember, that 1999 win against New Zealand.
Second year I was in the team was 1999. We went over to New Zealand. We're playing against New Zealand over there in the final, and we ended up winning that game by 1 goal right on the buzzer, and it was very exciting. We loved it. Yeah, I shot the winning goal in that game. It was very exciting. I wasn't on the court for that long during that game, but I got an opportunity towards the end, and yeah, the ball fell into my hands, and luckily enough, the shot that I put up went through, and great way to win a world championship.
Thanks very much for that. Nice to see some of those memories, and I hope that this change of pace isn't too jarring for people, because what amazing speakers we've already heard from. But I will push on with what I'm talking about, because it is fantastic to be here, and thank you so much, Mike, for the invitation. This topic that we're talking about personal growth and development, is something that I am incredibly passionate about. And I've done a lot of work in this throughout my playing career, but since I've retired as well. And I'm going to be talking to you, as Mike mentioned, about elite performance, just performance under pressure. And I've been incredibly lucky in my career. I apologise for my voice as well. It's a little bit croaky today, so hopefully we'll get through the talk. Lucky it's only short. Talking about performance under pressure. And as I said, I've been very lucky to have performed under lots of high-pressure situations. The one we just saw was one. A lot of them were good, like we've just seen. Quite a few of them were not so good as well, didn't turn out quite as I would have liked. But I certainly learnt a lot through those situations. And what I did learn is that how you react in those situations are really important. I learn a lot from the good and the bad. But what I learnt more importantly is how well those lessons translate into life outside of sport. You know, I talk about those high pressure situations, and a lot of what I'll talk about is what happened on court for me. But off court, in everyday life, we all experience lots of different high pressure or pressure situations. And so I think these lessons can apply really well to that. You know, there was so much, as I was thinking about what to talk to you about in such a short amount of time, that I could have covered. So I've really tried to whittle it down and just pick out a few keys. One of the things I won't go into detail about, but I just wanted to mention, was relationships and how important they are. And so for me, I've had some fantastic relationships and amazing support that I've had right throughout my career. Some of those relationships that I've had weren't so good for me. And I guess what I've tried to do along the way is invest more time into those relationships that give me something really positive, and maybe not so much in those ones that the people who bring you down. So for me, underpinning everything that I have done is the relationships that I've had and the support that I've got from some amazing people. One of the first experiences I had with performing at a higher level and in a slightly pressured situation was when I first went down to Melbourne. As Mike mentioned, I grew up in a little place called McMAHON, which is near Echuca. It's not Rochester, it's even smaller than that. It's a little dairy farming community. And I went down to trial for a state team. I was only 14 years old. And, I'll never forget that experience of going along there. It was very daunting. And I really did wonder whether I belonged. Really had some doubts about whether that was the place for me. I went in there, and even although we were only 14, we were only young, I just saw these athletes as people. They'd been through the system before. They were better players than me, and there was part of me thinking, why am I here? Anyway, the coach stood up in front of us, very similar to this, and gave us a bit of a pep talk about the expectations that were coming ahead to be part of the Victorian state team, and about some of the hard work that was going to happen, and what we were going to be getting up to. And she said, if you're not ready for that, if you don't think you can commit, you need to stand up and leave now. And I looked around because I thought she was speaking directly to me. She had just said all the things that I was thinking, all the doubts that were in my mind. And I nearly stood up and went, yep, you got me, I'm out. Luckily I didn't. I stayed put, and I went back down the following year and made the state team. I didn't make it that first time, but I went on. A couple of years after that, I was only 16 and I moved to Melbourne. I went and took up a scholarship at the Victorian Institute of Sport in netball and went to school at Wesley College in Paran, which I can tell you is very different to Rochie High, and the tiny little school that I used to go to. And I was homesick. And when I was first asked to do that, to move to Melbourne, I just said, no thanks, I'm good. I'm happy here in Beaumont. I'm happy I'm very comfortable. I had a great group of friends and family, and that's what I knew. But again, I was encouraged to do that and to take that opportunity and that risk. So I did. I moved down to Melbourne and I hated it. Absolutely hated it. I was homesick. I was in tears to my family, constantly on the phone. But what that experience taught me was that although it was tough, it's really only in those moments that you step out of your comfort zone and you push yourself where the special things happen. Now, I could have stayed in Beaumont and it would have been, I'm sure, a happy life, and I would have been very comfortable. But there's no way I would have experienced the things that I did. So for me, as I said, that self-doubt and those fears have kind of followed me throughout my career. Should I have been there trying for that state team? Should I have moved to Melbourne? Could I perform at a World Cup in a final? Could I shoot the winning goal when it was needed? I always had those doubts that came with me. But what I learned along the way is that the way you find belief and the way you find courage, courage for me isn't the absence of fear, because we all have fears, and Gunter, you were talking about fears and the way you can turn that around. We all have those. For me, courage is doing what's required and what's necessary despite the fear. Taking that risk, taking the opportunity and really putting yourself out there. The worst that can happen is it doesn't work out. And my mum told me that. She's still living in the house that I moved away from when I was 16. So if it doesn't work out, I can still move home. So that's good to know. But if it doesn't work out, what's the worst thing that can happen? You try something new, you try something different, and you go again. Sometimes, however, we can have that belief and that courage, we can find that within ourselves, but things go wrong. The plan doesn't turn out according to how we would like. Best laid plans, we can have everything there, but things go wrong. Bad things happen. And, we have a series of things happen to us as we go through life, a lot of great things, but I'm talking about when things do go wrong and those bad things that happen to us. But it is not what happens to us that is important. It's how we react to what happens to us, which will really dictate the impact that has. Two people can have exactly the same experience and come out of it with a completely different view on it and a completely different way of handling that situation. Someone will handle it very positively and focus on what they can do to make that situation better, and others will take the negative route. So don't let what happens to you impact you now and in the future. It doesn't have to. I snapped my Achilles, as Mike mentioned. It was 3 months out from a World Cup. I was the captain of the Australian Diamonds at the time. I was leading them to a World Champs for the first time. It was going to be my 4th World Champs, and I'd planned to retire after that. And I'll never forget being wheeled in to the operating theatre the next day, and I said to the surgeon, 3 months till the World Cup, I'll be right, won't I? I'll be there. And he laughed and laughed and said, you won't be walking by the time you get to the World Cup. And he was nearly right. I was just walking. It's a tough rehab from an Achilles snap. And so for me, that was a really tough situation, and it was unfair for that to happen to me. But what I decided to do was to focus on what I could do in a positive way after that. I gave as much as I could to Natalie von Berto, who took over the captaincy from me. I went over to Singapore and connected with the team as much as I could to help them. And they won the World Champs, which was a bittersweet time for me, but fantastic, no doubt. I focused on that rehab. It would have been easy to focus on the negative side of things and how unfair it was. But as I said, my best laid plan didn't work. But I tried to have that positive mindset to really, work towards what was going on next, because my goal had to change. It is easy to say that, but how do we do it? How do we focus on the positive things in those tough situations? That's a really good question, because it can be tough sometimes. And what has always worked for me is absolutely focusing on the things that you can control. Sometimes it's easy to be distracted by things that other people are doing or that are outside our control, and is just a waste of our time and energy. So focus on what you can control. As I said with my Achilles, I couldn't control the fact that the team was still going on to the World Cup and how unfair that was, and how that, I was nearly at the end of my career and I didn't want to have a snapped Achilles to end my career. So I focused on the things that I could control in giving to my new captain and the team. And I focused on my rehab, because that was what was really key for me in getting myself back into good working order. And I had a baby. That was the other positive thing that happened at that time. And then I came back to playing, because I didn't want that final memory for me to be that negative one. So controlling what you can control is so important. A couple of years after that video that you just saw, in 2002, I went to the Commonwealth Games in Manchester. And it was an incredible experience. The Commonwealth Games are just like something you've never known before. It's just a great thing to be involved in. And we were playing in the final against New Zealand again. We were in a stadium filled to the brim with 12,000 people. And I went out onto that court with lots of painkillers in my ankle, because I had rolled my ankle a couple of days before the final. But I wanted to do everything that I could to be there. And I made it. I got out onto court. And this game was an interesting one. We started like a house on fire, and we went out to a 7-goal lead, but New Zealand reeled us in. Then they went out to a 5-goal lead, but we pulled it back. And the lead just kept swinging throughout the whole game. We got to the end of full time, the whistle blew, and the scores were level. So what that meant is that we had to go into extra time, which in netball is 2 7-minute halves. And I walked off the court. Actually, no, I probably limped and almost crawled off the court, because any thought of any painkiller in the ankle had totally gone by then. And I just said to one of my teammates, I'm like, I don't know if I can go on. I can't walk, let alone run. And she grabbed me by the shoulders and said, you can do it. Because she was a very passionate person. Again, those relationships that I had. And she pushed me on to that court, almost literally, and off we went again. 2 7-minute halves, and it was tight, goal for the 2 7-minute halves. We got to the end of the second 7 minutes, and the scores were still tied. So we went into double extra time. We were all exhausted, fighting with whatever we had to try and get the 2-goal advantage that would now give us that gold medal. We were 1 goal up, New Zealand had the ball, our defenders got a rebound, and the ball came down court and it ended up in my hands. About halfway out, my defender contacted me and fell on the floor. So the umpire signalled time, called time, and asked the ball girl to come in and wipe the sweat off the floor. So I was standing there with the ball in my hands, knowing that the next shot I was going to take was for the gold medal. And I'll never forget that moment of being there and thinking, well, trying to think, no one cares if this goes in. But really what I was trying to do is control what I could control. Could I control the fact that the crowd in the stadium, the 12,000 people, were absolutely losing their minds, or the bench was jumping up and down, or my goal shooter who was on court, who has since told me was under the post going, please don't pass it to me. No, I couldn't control any of that. What I could control is what I did next. So I thought about all those times in the backyard, shooting goals, and all the time in training about getting that shot right, and that's what I focused on. So when the umpire blew her whistle to call time on, I didn't look at my teammate or the bench or the defender doing God knows what in front of me. I took the shot and it went in. So we won the gold medal by 1 goal right on the buzzer. By the 2-goal advantage on that buzzer. And it was an incredible experience. But again, what that taught me is that in those pressure situations and when things are happening, something's gone wrong, some situation's going on, sometimes it's easy to get distracted by the noise. It's easy to get distracted by what someone else is doing and what they should or shouldn't have done in that situation. But the way you impact what is going to happen next is by focusing on the things that you can control. Don't get distracted by the noise. The last point that I wanted to make, I often get asked about staying motivated or giving a motivational speech. And I think that that's kind of the wrong way to frame things slightly. For me, when we'll talk about motivation versus discipline, okay? I think motivation can sometimes be put up too high and we search for it a little bit too much. I used to have to do a lot of early morning training sessions. I'm not a morning person at all. I hate it. I'm up till midnight most nights. I'm much more of a night owl. But we had a lot of training sessions, so my alarm would go off at 5 a.m. And was I motivated to get out of bed at that time? No. My motivation levels were through the floor. But did I get out of bed and go to that training session? You betcha I did. Because I knew that I needed to do that. I needed to get out and do that training session to reach the goal I was looking for. I'd laid out my plan. I knew what was happening. It is much more about discipline in that moment than the motivation. So rather than pinning what we do in our everyday life around how motivated we are and how do we find that motivation, what is more important is what you're willing to do despite your levels of motivation, whether they're there or not. That is what's going to determine your level of success or not. If I relied on being motivated all the time to do the things that I needed to do to play netball for Australia and to shoot those goals that I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to shoot, if I relied on the motivation the whole way through, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it. Because at different times, my motivation levels were really high. Sometimes they were really low. But I continued doing the things that were necessary through those times, which I think is really key. And, you might walk out of here today picking up different things from each one and feel a bit motivated about what you're going to do next, which is great. I love that. That might last a day, a week, a month. I don't know, maybe it'll last a year. That'd be great. But what happens when that motivation wears off? Do you keep doing the things that you know are necessary to do? That's the key. That's where things will really impact your success. So by doing that, by having the discipline and the grit and the determination to keep going despite those levels of motivation, you will know in those pressure situations when they come along, as they inevitably will, you'll know that you've done the things that you need to be prepared for that situation. And for me, being prepared and doing all those things that really did give me the confidence to be able to, again, put myself out there despite the fear and the doubts that I had. So back yourself and really take those chances and take those opportunities and risks when they come along. So the challenge is there for you all, but the good news is that for a lot of this, it's in your hands. It's up to you. Thanks.